I never thought a dental office would be the place where I'd learn the most important lesson about judging people. My sister Sarah walked into Premier Dental Associates that Tuesday morning, looking like any other person dealing with tooth pain, wearing her usual faded jeans and worn sneakers. The receptionist took one look at her, and I could see the judgment forming before Sarah even opened her mouth. But what happened next would change how I see every interaction for the rest of my life. Because sometimes the person sitting quietly in the corner, the one everyone overlooks, is exactly the person who deserves the most respect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The emergency dental appointment had been the only opening they could give us for 3 weeks. Sarah had been dealing with what she called a little discomfort for months, but I knew from the way she held her jaw and the dark circles under her eyes that it was much more than that. She'd finally admitted the pain was keeping her awake at night, making it hard to eat anything that required actual chewing. When I offered to drive her to the appointment, she'd hesitated in that way she always did when accepting help, like she was calculating whether she was worth the trouble. Premier Dental Associates occupied the entire second floor of a medical complex in downtown Sacramento, all gleaming tile and abstract art that probably cost more than my car. The waiting room smelled like mint, and that particular brand of industrial cleaner that expensive places use to maintain their image of sterility and success. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, while a waterfall feature in the corner provided the kind of ambient noise designed to make you forget you were about to spend a fortune on your teeth. The chairs were leather, the magazines were current, and everything from the lighting to the carefully arranged silk plants suggested that this was a place where people with good insurance and better credit came to maintain their perfect smiles. I felt underdressed in my teaching clothes, a simple blouse and khakis that had seen too many classroom spills and playground duties. Sarah, in her worn Levi's and a flannel shirt that had been through more wash cycles than I could count, looked like she'd wandered in from a different world entirely. The receptionist behind the curved oak desk was probably in her mid-30s. Blonde hair styled in that effortless way that actually required considerable effort, wearing scrubs that somehow managed to look designer. Her nameplate read Jessica in elegant script, and she had the kind of manicure that suggested she'd never changed a tire or painted a fence in her life. When we approached the desk, she looked up from her computer screen with a smile that was professionally trained but didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, and I noticed how her gaze moved quickly over Sarah's appearance, taking in the scuffed boots, the flannel with a small tear near the elbow, the absence of jewelry or any other markers of disposable income. Her tone was polite, but carried that subtle distance that service workers perfected when they were dealing with people they assumed couldn't afford the premium experience. "Sarah Mitchell," my sister said quietly. "I have a 2:30 appointment for an emergency consultation." Jessica's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency, but I could see her expression shift slightly as she pulled up Sarah's file. Whatever she was reading there apparently confirmed her initial assessment. "Yes, here you are. Dr. Harrison will see you, but I need to let you know that emergency consultations require payment in full at the time of service. No payment plans for first-time patients." She slid a clipboard across the desk, heavy with forms that I recognized from my own dental experiences. Insurance verification, medical history, financial responsibility agreements, the kind of paperwork that made it clear exactly where the practice's priorities lay. If you need financing options, we work with several third-party companies, but approval isn't guaranteed and interest rates vary based on credit scores. Sarah took the clipboard without comment, but I watched her shoulders tense slightly. She'd been dealing with this kind of interaction for months, ever since she'd moved back home and started trying to rebuild her life. Every government office, every medical appointment, every interaction with people who looked at her surface and made assumptions about what lay beneath. The waiting room was about half full, and I found myself cataloging the other patients as Sarah filled out her forms. A middle-aged businessman in an expensive suit was typing rapidly on his phone, occasionally wincing as he prodded at what was obviously a painful molar. A young mother sat with her teenage daughter, both of them dressed in the kind of carefully casual clothes that suggested suburban comfort. An elderly gentleman in pressed slacks and a cardigan was reading Forbes magazine, his wedding ring catching the light from the designer fixtures overhead. Everyone looked like they belonged here, like they were the kind of patients this practice was designed to serve. Everyone except Sarah, who sat hunched over her clipboard, working through the medical history section with the methodical care of someone who'd learned that small mistakes on forms could have large consequences. I watched her pause at the section about previous surgeries and hospitalizations. Her pen hovered over the paper for a long moment before she began writing in the careful block letters she'd perfected for government paperwork. I couldn't see what she was writing, but I knew it would only be the minimum required information. Sarah had learned to be economical with details about her past, sharing only what was absolutely necessary to get through whatever bureaucratic hurdle she was facing. "Mrs. Mitchell?" A dental hygienist emerged from the treatment area, clipboard in hand, her voice carrying across the waiting room with professional cheerfulness. She was younger than Jessica, maybe late 20s, with that energetic friendliness that suggested she actually enjoyed her job. "I'm Amanda. I'll be taking your x-rays today." Sarah stood slowly, and I could see her calculating whether to ask me to come back with her. We discussed this in the car, whether I should present myself as moral support or whether my presence would somehow complicate the interaction. In the end, she decided to handle it alone, the way she handled most things these days. "The consultation will take about an hour," Amanda continued, addressing both of us but looking primarily at me, apparently assuming I was the decision-maker in this scenario. "Dr. Harrison will go over all the treatment options and costs before any work is done. If there are any concerns about payment, we can discuss those during the consultation." The way she said concerns about payment made it clear that such concerns were expected, probably common, and definitely something that would affect the level of service provided. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest, the same frustration I experienced whenever I watched people make assumptions about Sarah based on her appearance or her address, or her lack of obvious prosperity. Sarah followed Amanda through the door that led to the treatment area, leaving me alone with my growing irritation and a selection of magazines that probably cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. I tried to focus on an article about sustainable architecture, but I kept thinking about the way Jessica had looked at Sarah, the subtle shift in tone when she'd mentioned payment policies, the assumption that my sister was probably going to be a problem patient who couldn't afford the care she needed. What bothered me most was that Sarah seemed to expect it. She'd walked into that office, prepared to be treated as a second-class citizen, ready to accept whatever level of service was deemed appropriate for someone in her circumstances. She developed that particular kind of dignity that comes from refusing to fight battles you know you're going to lose. From choosing your confrontations carefully because you can't afford to waste energy on every slight. 20 minutes later, I could hear voices coming from the treatment area, muffled by walls but loud enough to carry the tone if not the specific words. Someone was speaking in the kind of patient, explanatory voice that adults used with children who weren't paying attention. Someone else was responding in short, quiet sentences. I recognized Sarah's voice in the responses, that careful neutrality she'd perfected for dealing with medical professionals who looked at her file before they looked at her face. The businessman across from me was still typing on his phone, apparently conducting some kind of business negotiation that involved a lot of numbers and what sounded like threats wrapped in corporate language. The mother and daughter were discussing summer vacation plans, their conversation full of casual references to camps and trips that represented more money than Sarah had seen in years. The elderly gentleman had moved on to a copy of Wine Spectator, occasionally nodding approvingly at whatever he was reading. I found myself wondering what any of these people would think if they knew Sarah's story. Whether the businessman would still be so focused on his phone if he understood what she'd sacrificed for his freedom to conduct business without fear. Whether the mother planning her daughter's summer would look at Sarah differently if she knew about the summers Sarah had spent in places where air conditioning was a luxury and clean water was never guaranteed. But Sarah had taught me that most people weren't ready for those stories. That there was a strange comfort in anonymity, in being able to move through the world without carrying the weight of other people's expectations or gratitude or pity. She'd chosen invisibility as a form of protection, a way to heal without having to explain herself to every person who thought they had a right to her history. The treatment room door opened and Amanda emerged, followed by Sarah, who was moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to show pain. Her jaw was obviously bothering her more than she'd admitted, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight favor she was giving to the left side of her face. "Dr. Harrison will be with you in just a moment," Amanda said, guiding Sarah back to the consultation area. "He'll go over everything we found and discuss your options." Sarah nodded and followed her, but not before catching my eye with a look that I'd learned to interpret over the years. It was her way of saying that things weren't going well, that the news was probably going to be expensive, and that she was already preparing herself for the conversation about what she could and couldn't afford. Dr. Harrison appeared 15 minutes later, a man in his early 50s with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from years of delivering both good news and bad news with equal professional composure. He wore his white coat like a uniform, and everything about his appearance suggested competence, experience, and probably a golf handicap that he was moderately proud of. "Mrs. Mitchell, I've reviewed your x-rays, and I'm afraid we're looking at a fairly complex situation," he said, settling into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd had this conversation hundreds of times. "You have significant decay in 3 molars, and one of them has developed an abscess that's going to require immediate attention." He had one of those light boards that dentists use to display x-rays, and he pointed to various shadows and shapes that meant nothing to me but apparently told him everything he needed to know about the current state of Sarah's mouth. His tone was professional but not unkind, the voice of someone who genuinely cared about dental health but had learned to protect himself emotionally from patients who couldn't afford the care they needed. "The abscessed tooth needs a root canal immediately, probably within the next few days, or you're looking at a much more serious infection. The other 2 teeth can wait a few weeks, but not much longer. We're talking about potential bone loss if this isn't addressed soon." Sarah sat quietly through his explanation, her hands folded in her lap, her expression carefully neutral. I could see her doing the mental calculations that had become second nature over the past few years, weighing the cost of treatment against the cost of continued pain, trying to figure out what she could postpone and what couldn't wait. "What are we looking at cost-wise?" she asked, and I admired the steadiness in her voice, the way she managed to ask the question without any defensive posturing or apologetic tone. Dr. Harrison consulted his notes, probably adding up numbers he'd calculated dozens of times that day. "The root canal is $1,800, and the 2 additional procedures would be $1,200 each. So we're looking at approximately $4,200 total, not including any complications that might arise during treatment." The number hung in the air between them like a physical presence. I watched Sarah's face carefully, looking for any sign of the impact, but she'd learned to absorb that kind of financial blow without flinching. $4,000 might as well have been $40,000, given her current circumstances. "The root canal really can't wait," Dr. Harrison continued, and I could hear something in his voice that suggested he'd dealt with this situation before, that he understood the mathematics of dental care versus disposable income. "We could potentially do a payment plan for that procedure, spread it out over 6 months. Jessica had appeared in the doorway, apparently summoned by some invisible signal, and she was holding a tablet that I assumed contained the financial options that practices like this kept ready for moments exactly like this one. Her expression had shifted into customer service mode, professionally sympathetic but ultimately focused on the business aspects of dental care. "We do offer financing through several companies," she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone who'd delivered this speech many times before. "Care Credit is probably your best option, assuming you qualify. The application process takes about 10 minutes, and approval is usually immediate." Sarah looked at the tablet Jessica was holding, then back at Dr. Harrison, then at me. I could see her weighing her options, calculating not just the financial cost, but the emotional cost of going through another credit application, another potential rejection, another reminder of how far her life had drifted from what she'd once planned. "What if the financing doesn't work out?" she asked, and I heard something in her voice that broke my heart a little. It was resignation mixed with determination, the sound of someone who'd learned to prepare for disappointment while still hoping for better outcomes. Dr. Harrison exchanged a look with Jessica, and I could see them both calculating something that had nothing to do with dental procedures. They were weighing compassion against business policy, professional ethics against practical realities. It was a look I'd seen before, in other offices, with other professionals who found themselves caught between wanting to help and needing to maintain a sustainable practice. "Well," Dr. Harrison said carefully, "we could potentially work something out. A modified payment plan, maybe spread over a longer period. But I have to be honest with you, Mrs. Mitchell, without some kind of financial arrangement, we really can't proceed with treatment today." The phrase, "work something out," carried the weight of charity, of special consideration that would require Sarah to essentially beg for care that she needed. I watched her face as she processed this, as she calculated the cost of accepting help on those terms versus the cost of walking away and trying to find treatment somewhere else, somewhere cheaper, somewhere that might be willing to treat a dental emergency without requiring a credit check first. "I understand," Sarah said quietly, and I could hear in those two words the accumulated weight of months of similar conversations in similar offices, with similar well-meaning professionals who ultimately had businesses to run and bottom lines to protect. Jessica stepped forward with her tablet, ready to begin the financial archaeology that would determine whether Sarah was worthy of immediate care or whether she'd be joining the ranks of people who lived with pain because they couldn't prove their ability to pay for relief. "Why don't we start with the care credit application?" Jessica said, her voice carrying that careful balance of helpfulness and low expectations. "It just takes a few minutes, and then we'll know what our options are." Sarah took the tablet and began working through the application, her fingers moving slowly across the screen as she entered information that would be fed into algorithms designed to assess her financial worthiness. Social security number, employment history, income verification, previous addresses. All the data points that would be used to determine whether her pain was worth the risk of extending credit. I sat there watching this process unfold, feeling helpless and angry and sad all at the same time. Angry at a system that made people prove their financial worthiness before receiving medical care. Sad that Sarah had to endure this kind of bureaucratic humiliation just to get treatment for an infection that could become life-threatening if left untreated. Helpless because I knew that offering to pay for the treatment myself would require a conversation about money that Sarah wasn't ready to have, about accepting help that would feel too much like charity. The application took about 10 minutes, just as Jessica had promised. When Sarah finished, she handed the tablet back and we all waited while the system processed her information, weighing her creditworthiness against corporate risk assessments that had been refined over years of similar applications from people in similar circumstances. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, and I could tell from her tone that the news wasn't good. "The application was declined. Your debt-to-income ratio is too high for their standard approval process." She said it gently, with the kind of professional sympathy that suggested she'd delivered similar news many times before, but the words still landed like a physical blow. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I saw her hands tighten slightly in her lap, the only sign that she'd absorbed yet another rejection from a system that seemed designed to keep people like her on the outside. "There are other options," Dr. Harrison said quickly, apparently uncomfortable with the silence that followed Jessica's announcement. "We could try a different financing company, or we could look at a cash discount program, or—" He trailed off, probably realizing that none of these alternatives were likely to solve the fundamental problem of Sarah's inability to prove her financial worthiness to a computer algorithm. "What would happen if I just waited?" Sarah asked, and I could hear her trying to calculate how much pain she could endure, how long she could postpone treatment before the infection became something that would require emergency room intervention. Dr. Harrison's expression grew serious, and I could see him weighing his responsibility as a medical professional against his understanding of Sarah's financial reality. "Mrs. Mitchell, I really wouldn't recommend waiting. Dental abscesses can spread quickly, and when they do, they can become life-threatening. We're talking about potential hospitalization, IV antibiotics, much more expensive treatment." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Sarah couldn't afford the $1,800 root canal, but if she waited and the infection spread, she'd be looking at hospital bills that could easily reach tens of thousands of dollars. It was the kind of medical economics that trapped people in cycles of crisis care, where preventative treatment was financially impossible, but emergency treatment was financially catastrophic. "Let me talk to my office manager," Dr. Harrison said, standing up with the air of someone who was about to have a conversation he'd probably had before. "Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement. Just give me a few minutes." He left the room, and Sarah and I were alone with Jessica, who was still holding her tablet and looking genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. She wasn't a bad person, I realized. She was just someone doing her job in a system that made caring expensive and compassion complicated. "I'm really sorry this is so difficult," Jessica said, and I could hear that she meant it. "Dr. Harrison is actually really good about working with patients when he can. He's not just about the money, you know, but we've got bills to pay too, and insurance companies that make everything complicated. And—" She trailed off, apparently realizing that explaining the business realities of dental care wasn't going to make Sarah feel better about her situation. We all sat there for a moment, trapped in the awkward silence that came from good people, caught in a system that didn't always allow for goodness. That's when Sarah pulled up her sleeve to check her watch. A simple gesture that she'd made thousands of times before. But this time, in the bright light of the consultation room, with Jessica sitting just a few feet away, something caught the young receptionist's attention. Something that made her expression change from professional sympathy to something else entirely. Something that would transform this entire encounter in ways none of us could have predicted. On Sarah's left wrist, just visible beneath the edge of her flannel sleeve, was a small tattoo that most people would have overlooked entirely. It wasn't decorative or artistic in any conventional sense. Just a series of numbers in simple black ink, arranged in a way that looked almost like a serial number or code. The digits were precise, clean, and had the kind of permanence that suggested they meant something important to the person who'd chosen to mark their skin with them. Jessica stared at those numbers for a long moment, her expression shifting from casual observation to something that looked almost like recognition. She was young, maybe 26 or 27, but there was something in her face that suggested she'd seen those particular digits before, in a context that had nothing to do with dental offices or patient payment plans. "Excuse me," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange note that I couldn't quite identify. "Those numbers on your wrist, are those coordinates?" Sarah's hand moved instinctively to cover the tattoo, a gesture so automatic that I realized she probably wasn't even aware she was doing it. But Jessica had already seen what she needed to see, and something in her demeanor had shifted completely. The professional receptionist persona had been replaced by something else entirely, something that looked almost like awe, mixed with disbelief. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't know what you mean." But Jessica was already reaching for her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen with the kind of urgency that suggested this was important in ways I didn't understand. She was pulling up something, some kind of application or database, entering numbers with practiced efficiency while her eyes kept flicking back to Sarah's wrist. "Those coordinates," Jessica said, her voice getting stronger, more certain. "Latitude 33, 3,152, longitude 44, 3,661. That's Baghdad, isn't it? Specifically, that's the Green Zone Medical District." Sarah went very still, the kind of stillness that comes from years of training in situations where movement could mean the difference between life and death. I could see her calculating something, weighing whether to continue the pretense of not understanding, or whether this conversation had already moved beyond the point where denial would be effective. "I don't think we should be discussing this," Sarah said quietly. But there was something in her voice that confirmed Jessica's suspicions rather than dismissing them. Jessica set down her phone and looked directly at Sarah with an expression I'd never seen on a dental receptionist's face before. It was the look of someone who'd just encountered something they'd only heard about in stories, something that existed in a world most people never got close to. "My brother was Army medic, 42nd Infantry Division, deployed to Iraq in 2019, Jessica said, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience with military deployment. "He used to tell me stories about the field surgeons who worked in the combat hospitals. Said there was this one Navy doctor who would tattoo the coordinates of every field surgery she performed under fire. Said it was her way of remembering the places where she'd saved lives when everything else was falling apart." The consultation room had grown completely quiet, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of dental equipment from other treatment rooms. Sarah was looking at Jessica with an expression I'd never seen before, a combination of surprise and something that might have been relief at being recognized, even if the recognition was unwelcome. He said she performed over 40 field surgeries during her deployment, most of them under active combat conditions. Said she was the kind of surgeon who could operate with mortar shells going off outside, who could save lives while buildings were collapsing around her. He called her a legend. Jessica paused, her eyes still fixed on Sarah's face, reading something there that I was missing entirely. He said her call sign was Miracle Worker, and that she had a tattoo for every surgery she performed under fire, coordinates marking the exact location where she'd pulled someone back from death. Sarah sat motionless for a long moment, and I could see her making the kind of calculation that military people learn to make quickly and accurately, whether to maintain operational security or whether the situation had evolved beyond the point where secrecy was possible or useful. "Your brother," Sarah said finally, her voice still carefully controlled. "What was his name?" "Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, 42nd Infantry, Combat Medical Specialist." Jessica replied immediately, and I could hear pride mixed with worry in her voice. He did 3 tours, came back with PTSD and a Bronze Star. Works construction now still talks about the field surgeons like they were superheroes. Sarah nodded slowly, and I watched her face change as she accessed memories that she usually kept locked away. I remember Sergeant Chen, good medic, steady hands under pressure. He assisted on a surgery I performed at Forward Operating Base Liberty, summer of 2019. Multiple casualty event, IED attack on a convoy. The confirmation hit Jessica like a physical force. She actually stepped backward, her hand going to her mouth, her eyes wide with something that looked like shock mixed with recognition and respect. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're her. You're Commander Sarah Mitchell. My brother told me about that surgery. Said you operated for 14 hours straight, saved 6 Marines who shouldn't have survived." Said it was the most incredible thing he'd ever seen. Dr. Harrison chose that moment to return to the consultation room, walking in with the brisk confidence of someone who just worked out a financial arrangement that would solve everyone's problems. He was carrying a folder and wearing the expression of a man who took pride in finding creative solutions to difficult situations. "Mrs. Mitchell, I think we can work something out," he began, but he stopped mid-sentence when he saw the expression on Jessica's face. "Is everything all right here?" Jessica turned to him with the kind of intensity that people reserved for genuinely important news. "Dr. Harrison, do you know who this is?" He looked confused, glancing between Jessica and Sarah with the expression of someone who is missing crucial context. "This is Mrs. Mitchell. She's here for emergency dental treatment. This is Commander Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy, trauma surgeon," Jessica said, her voice carrying the weight of revelation. She served 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, performed field surgery under active combat conditions, saved hundreds of lives. Dr. Harrison's expression shifted as he processed this information, his eyes moving to Sarah with new understanding. But Sarah was shaking her head, her discomfort with the attention clearly visible. "I'm retired," she said quietly. "That's not who I am anymore." But Jessica wasn't finished. She was pulling up something else on her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with renewed purpose. "Dr. Harrison, you need to see this. My brother sent me this article last year. Said every military family should read it." She held up her phone, displaying what appeared to be a military news website. The headline was partially visible: "Naval Combat Surgeons, Heroes of Modern Warfare." The article featured several photographs, and even from where I was sitting, I could see that one of them showed a younger version of Sarah in military fatigues, standing outside what looked like a field hospital. Commander Mitchell was featured in this article about combat surgeons who performed surgery under impossible conditions, Jessica continued, her voice getting stronger as she scrolled through the content. "It says here that she holds the record for most successful field surgeries performed under direct enemy fire. 43 operations, with a 97% survival rate." Dr. Harrison moved closer to look at the phone screen, his expression changing as he absorbed the information Jessica was showing him. I could see him reading, his eyebrows rising as he encountered details that put Sarah's current situation in a completely different context. "It says she was awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism in combat," he said slowly, reading from the article, "and the Navy Commendation Medal with Combat V for Valor. Multiple citations for life-saving actions under enemy fire." Sarah was sitting very still through all of this, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. I could see her struggling with the attention, with having her military service brought into a situation where she'd just wanted to get dental treatment without fanfare or special consideration. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly, "and it doesn't change the fact that I can't afford root canal surgery." But Dr. Harrison was still reading from Jessica's phone, his face showing increasing amazement as he encountered more details about Sarah's service record. Commander Mitchell received the Combat Medical Badge for providing medical care under direct and indirect enemy fire. She established field surgical protocols that are still taught in military medical schools. He looked up from the phone to study Sarah's face, as if seeing her for the first time. "It says here that you developed new techniques for trauma surgery in combat environments, that your innovations saved thousands of lives beyond the patients you personally treated." Sarah's discomfort was becoming more visible now, and I could see her preparing to leave, to extract herself from a situation that had moved far beyond her comfort zone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Jessica was already reaching for the office phone, dialing an extension with the kind of urgency that suggested important calls were about to be made. Dr. Westfield needs to know about this, Jessica said, apparently calling someone whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in this building. He's going to want to meet Commander Mitchell personally. That's really not necessary, Sarah said, standing up with the clear intention of ending this encounter before it escalated further. I appreciate the recognition, but I just came here for dental treatment. Nothing more than that. But it was too late. The door opened, and a man entered who commanded immediate attention despite his casual appearance. He was probably in his early 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes, wearing scrubs that suggested he'd just finished with a patient. But there was something about his bearing that suggested this was someone accustomed to being in charge, someone whose opinion carried weight in this practice. Jessica said, "We have a special guest," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of running a successful medical practice. Dr. Robert Westfield, practice owner. He extended his hand towards Sarah with genuine warmth, but she hesitated before accepting the handshake, clearly uncomfortable with the level of attention this encounter was generating. "I understand you're Commander Mitchell," Dr. Westfield continued. "Jessica tells me you're Navy medical, combat veteran. I have to say, it's an honor to meet you." Sarah accepted the handshake briefly, then stepped back, her posture suggesting she wanted to maintain distance from this conversation. "I'm retired, Dr. Westfield. Just here for dental treatment." But Dr. Westfield was studying her with the kind of professional interest that one medical professional reserved for another, especially one whose reputation preceded them. "Commander, I have to ask, are you the Sarah Mitchell who developed the Mitchell Protocol for battlefield triage? Because if you are, I've been using your techniques for 20 years. The question hung in the air, and I could see Sarah calculating whether there was any point in continuing to downplay her background. The room had filled with a kind of tension that came from the collision of two very different worlds. The world where Sarah was a veteran struggling with dental bills, and the world where Commander Mitchell was a legend whose innovations had changed military medicine. "The triage protocols were developed by a team," Sarah said carefully. "I just happened to be the one whose name got attached to them." Dr. Westfield shook his head, his expression showing genuine admiration mixed with professional respect. "Commander, I did my residency at Walter Reed. I worked with combat casualties for 10 years before opening this practice. The Mitchell Protocol didn't just get your name attached to it. You revolutionized how we approach mass casualty events." He turned to Dr. Harrison, who was still processing the transformation of his patient from potential payment problem to military hero. "Tom, do you understand what we're dealing with here? Commander Mitchell's triage innovations are taught in every emergency medicine program in the country. Her work has saved more lives than we can count." Dr. Harrison was nodding slowly, his expression showing the kind of recognition that came from encountering someone whose reputation existed in textbooks and medical journals. "The rapid assessment protocols we use in our emergency procedures, those came from military field medicine, didn't they?" "Directly from Commander Mitchell's work in Iraq and Afghanistan," Dr. Westfield confirmed. "She developed techniques for making life-or-death decisions in seconds, under conditions that would paralyze most medical professionals." Sarah was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking, and I could see her preparing to make an exit that would end this encounter before it went any further. But Dr. Westfield was already moving to block her path to the door, not physically restraining her, but positioning himself in a way that suggested this conversation wasn't over. "Commander, I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me since Jessica called," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "What are you doing trying to get financing for dental treatment? Someone with your service record should have full VA medical coverage." The question hit Sarah like a physical blow, and I watched her face change as she encountered the same bureaucratic frustration that had been following her for months. Her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly, revealing the exhaustion and frustration that she'd been carrying beneath the surface. "The VA dental coverage is limited," she said quietly. "Emergency procedures only, and they have to pre-approve everything. The approval process takes weeks, sometimes months, and this can't wait that long." Dr. Westfield's expression darkened as he processed this information, and I could see anger building behind his professional composure. Commander, are you telling me that the VA is making you wait weeks for approval for emergency dental surgery? For an abscessed tooth that could become life-threatening? Sarah nodded, her resignation evident in the gesture. It's just how the system works, Dr. Westfield. I'm not special. Everyone deals with the same bureaucracy. But Dr. Westfield was already shaking his head, his anger now clearly visible. No, Commander. You are special. You're exactly the kind of special that this country promises to take care of. And if the VA is failing in that promise, then we have a serious problem. He turned to Jessica, who was still holding her phone, still ready to make whatever calls were necessary to address this situation. Get me Admiral Stone's office at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. Tell them Dr. Robert Westfield needs to speak with the Admiral immediately about a veteran care issue. The name Admiral Stone hit the room like a thunderclap, and I watched Sarah's expression change completely. Her carefully maintained composure disappeared entirely, replaced by something that looked like genuine shock mixed with apprehension. Dr. Westfield, she said quickly, that's really not necessary. I don't want to bother Admiral Stone with something like this. But Dr. Westfield was already dialing, his movements quick and decisive. Commander Admiral Stone specifically asked me to contact him if I ever encountered veteran care issues that needed immediate attention. This qualifies. He held up a hand to forestall Sarah's protests while the phone rang. Robert, Admiral Stone's office. This is Dr. Robert Westfield in Sacramento. I need to speak with Admiral Stone immediately about a veteran care situation involving Commander Sarah Mitchell. There was a pause while he listened to whoever had answered the phone. Then his expression grew more serious. Yes, I'll hold. But tell the Admiral this is urgent. Sarah had gone completely pale, and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she absorbed the implications of what was happening. Whatever relationship existed between her and Admiral Stone, it was clearly significant enough to cause her genuine distress at the prospect of involving him in her current situation. Dr. Westfield, she said, her voice carrying a note of desperation that I'd never heard before, please don't do this. Admiral Stone has more important things to deal with than my dental problems. But Dr. Westfield was already speaking into the phone, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was accustomed to having important conversations with important people. Admiral Stone, this is Dr. Robert Westfield. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have Commander Sarah Mitchell in my office and we have a serious problem. The pause that followed Dr. Westfield's words stretched longer than any silence I'd ever experienced. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears while Sarah stood frozen in the center of the consultation room, her face a mixture of resignation and something that looked almost like panic. Whatever history existed between her and Admiral Stone was clearly complicated enough to cause her genuine distress at having him dragged into her current situation. Dr. Westfield kept the phone pressed to his ear, nodding occasionally at whatever Admiral Stone was saying on the other end of the line. His expression grew more serious with each passing moment, and I could see him processing information that was changing his understanding of exactly who Sarah was and why this phone call mattered more than anyone in the room had initially realized. Yes, Admiral, I understand completely, Dr. Westfield said, his voice carrying the careful respect of someone speaking to a superior officer. She's here right now, dealing with an emergency dental situation that requires immediate attention. The VA approval process is delaying treatment for what could become a life-threatening infection. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath, the kind of controlled breathing that suggested she was using techniques learned in high-stress situations to maintain her composure. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different in her expression, a kind of acceptance that suggested she'd realized this situation was beyond her control now. Admiral Stone wants to speak with you directly, Commander. Drive, Westfield said, extending the phone toward Sarah with an expression that made it clear this wasn't really a request. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then accepted the phone with the careful movements of someone handling something that might explode. Admiral Stone, this is Sarah Mitchell. Even from where I was sitting, I could hear the voice on the other end of the line, deep and commanding but carrying an undertone of what sounded like genuine concern. The conversation was brief, mostly Admiral Stone speaking, while Sarah responded with short acknowledgments that revealed nothing about the content of their discussion. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. No, sir, I wasn't trying to avoid proper channels. Yes, sir, I'll remain here until this is resolved. She handed the phone back to Dr. Westfield, who listened for another moment before hanging up with an expression that suggested the conversation had been both enlightening and somewhat overwhelming. "Commander Mitchell," Dr. Westfield said, his voice carrying a completely different tone than it had when she'd first walked into his office. "Admiral Stone is sending someone to handle this situation personally. He asked that you remain here until they arrive." The words hung in the air with the weight of a military order, and I could see Sarah calculating whether she had any choice in the matter. Her shoulders straightened slightly, falling into a posture that suggested muscle memory from years of receiving orders from superior officers. "How long?" she asked quietly. 20 minutes, Dr. Westfield replied. "He said to tell you that Commander Rodriguez is en route and will handle everything." The name Commander Rodriguez caused Sarah's expression to shift again, this time towards something that might have been relief mixed with apprehension. Clearly, this was someone she knew, someone whose involvement in her situation carried implications that I couldn't begin to understand. Jessica had been standing quietly through this entire exchange, but now she moved forward with the kind of purposeful energy that suggested she'd made some kind of decision. "Commander Mitchell, while we're waiting, would you mind if I asked you about something my brother mentioned? He said you performed surgery during the siege at Forward Operating Base Falcon. Said it was the most incredible thing he'd ever witnessed." Sarah looked uncomfortable with the question, but there was something in Jessica's tone that suggested this was important to her, not just idle curiosity about military service. "Your brother was there?" "He was part of the medical team that assisted you during the 48-hour siege. Said you operated continuously for 2 days while the base was under constant attack. Saved 17 critical casualties who would have died without immediate surgical intervention." Dr. Westfield had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement, and now he stepped forward with the kind of professional interest that one medical practitioner reserved for another whose achievements transcended normal expectations. "Commander, I have to ask about the surgical conditions you worked under," he said. "Jessica mentioned that you performed operations during active combat. How is that even possible from a technical standpoint?" Sarah seemed to consider whether to answer the question, weighing her natural reluctance to discuss her military service against the genuine professional curiosity in Dr. Westfield's voice. Finally, she settled into one of the consultation chairs with the air of someone who'd decided that resistance was futile. "The field surgical units were designed for mobility and rapid deployment," she said, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone discussing technical specifications rather than life-or-death situations. "We had portable operating theaters that could be set up in secured buildings, underground bunkers, anywhere we could establish sterile conditions and maintain power for essential equipment." Dr. Harrison had been listening from the doorway, and now he moved closer with the expression of someone encountering a master practitioner in his own field. "But performing surgery while under enemy fire, that's beyond anything we train for in civilian medicine. How do you maintain surgical precision when buildings are exploding around you?" Sarah's expression grew distant, as if she was accessing memories that she usually kept carefully locked away. "You develop what we called combat focus, the ability to narrow your attention to the immediate surgical field, while your training handles everything else automatically. Your hands know what to do, your instruments become extensions of your nervous system, and you learn to work through distractions that would paralyze most people." She paused, her eyes focusing on something beyond the walls of the consultation room. "The first time you operate while mortar shells are landing outside, you think it's impossible. But then you realize that the patient on your table is depending on you to ignore everything except the work. So you learn to ignore everything except the work." The room had grown completely quiet, except for the soft hum of the dental equipment and the distant sounds of the office continuing its normal operations. Everyone present seemed to understand that they were hearing something that most people never got to hear. A glimpse into a world where medical professionals worked under conditions that redefined what was possible. "The siege at FOB Falcon lasted 48 hours, Sarah continued, her voice maintaining that same careful technical tone. "We had 17 critical casualties, multiple trauma cases that required immediate surgical intervention. The enemy had us surrounded, so evacuation wasn't possible. We had to treat everyone on site with whatever supplies we had." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of attention people reserved for stories that connected to their personal experience. "My brother said you operated for 2 days straight without sleep. Said you saved people who had no right to survive their injuries." Sarah shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to minimize the extraordinary nature of what she was describing. That's what we were trained to do. Military surgeons don't have the luxury of stable conditions or unlimited time. You work with what you have, you save who you can, and you don't waste time on situations you can't control. Dr. Westfield was shaking his head with the kind of amazement that came from encountering professional achievement that transcended normal expectations. Commander, what you're describing isn't just medical skill. It's medical skill combined with psychological resilience that most people can't even imagine. Before Sarah could respond, we heard voices in the hallway outside the consultation room. Authoritative voices that carried the unmistakable cadence of military personnel conducting official business. Dr. Westfield moved to the door and opened it, revealing two figures in naval uniforms who commanded immediate attention despite the civilian setting. The first was a woman in her early 40s, wearing the insignia of a Navy commander, with short dark hair and the kind of bearing that suggested someone accustomed to handling complex situations with calm efficiency. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture perfect, and everything about her appearance communicated professional competence and unshakable authority. The second figure was a young lieutenant, probably in his late 20s, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd been tasked with handling important paperwork under tight deadlines. He moved with the quick efficiency of a junior officer who understood that his role was to support the commander's mission without getting in the way. "Dr. Westfield?" the commander asked, stepping into the consultation room with the kind of presence that immediately reorganized the social dynamics of the space. "I'm Commander Elena Rodriguez, Naval Medical Center, San Diego. Admiral Stone sent me to address a veteran care issue involving Commander Sarah Mitchell." Sarah stood immediately, coming to attention with the automatic precision of someone whose military training remained embedded in muscle memory. "Commander Rodriguez." Commander Rodriguez studied Sarah's face for a moment, her expression showing recognition mixed with something that looked like professional respect. "Commander Mitchell, Admiral Stone briefed me on your situation. I understand you're dealing with emergency dental care that the VA has been slow to approve." The way she said it made it clear that this delay was not acceptable, that someone in the VA approval chain was about to have a very unpleasant conversation with people whose authority superseded bureaucratic procedures. "Ma'am, it's just the normal approval process," Sarah said, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to cause trouble for people who were trying to help her. "I understand that emergency procedures take time to authorize." Commander Rodriguez's expression shifted towards something that looked like controlled anger, the kind of professional displeasure that superior officers reserved for situations where the system was failing people who deserved better treatment. "Commander Mitchell, there is nothing normal about making a combat veteran wait weeks for approval of emergency medical treatment," she said, her voice carrying the weight of official policy backed by significant authority, "especially not a veteran with your service record." She turned to Dr. Westfield with the air of someone who was about to solve problems that had seemed unsolvable moments before. "Doctor, what treatment does Commander Mitchell require?" Dr. Westfield consulted his notes with the quick efficiency of someone who suddenly understood that all bureaucratic obstacles had been removed from this situation. "Emergency root canal to address an abscessed tooth, plus 2 additional restorative procedures. Total cost approximately $4,200. Commander Rodriguez nodded and turned to the lieutenant, who immediately stepped forward with his briefcase. "Lieutenant Vega, please process the emergency medical authorization for Commander Mitchell's dental treatment. Full coverage, immediate approval, no cost to the patient." Lieutenant Vega opened his briefcase and began removing forms with practiced efficiency, his movements quick and precise as he processed paperwork that would have taken the VA approval system weeks to handle. "Yes, ma'am. Authorization number 7791 Alpha. Processed under emergency veteran care provisions, effective immediately." He handed a set of forms to Dr. Westfield, who accepted them with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed bureaucracy transformed into efficiency through the application of appropriate authority. "Doctor, these forms provide full authorization for Commander Mitchell's treatment. The Navy will handle all costs directly." Sarah was standing quietly through this entire exchange, her expression showing a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment at being the center of so much official attention. "Commander Rodriguez, This is really more than necessary. I don't want to create problems for anyone. Commander Rodriguez turned to study Sarah's face with the kind of attention that suggested she was evaluating more than just the immediate medical situation. Commander Mitchell, Admiral Stone asked me to brief you on why this level of attention is not only necessary but long overdue. She paused, consulting a folder that Lieutenant Vega had handed her. Your service record indicates 3 combat deployments, 43 field surgeries performed under direct enemy fire, development of triage protocols currently used throughout military medical services, and recommendations for valor that were classified at levels requiring special clearance. The consultation room had grown completely silent as Commander Rodriguez read from Sarah's official record, detailing achievements that put her current situation in a completely different context. Even Jessica, who had started this entire encounter by recognizing Sarah's significance, was listening with obvious amazement at the scope of what was being described. You hold the record for most successful field surgeries performed under combat conditions, with a survival rate that exceeds civilian trauma centers operating under ideal conditions, Commander Rodriguez continued. Your innovations in battlefield medicine have been credited with saving thousands of lives beyond the patients you personally treated. She looked up from the folder to address everyone in the room. The techniques Commander Mitchell developed for rapid trauma assessment are now standard protocol in emergency rooms throughout the United States. Her work has been studied in medical schools, cited in peer-reviewed journals, and adopted by civilian emergency services worldwide. Dr. Westfield was nodding slowly, his expression showing the kind of recognition that came from encountering someone whose professional achievements had influenced his own practice. The rapid assessment protocols we use here, those came from military field medicine innovations, didn't they? Directly from Commander Mitchell's work in Iraq and Afghanistan, Commander Rodriguez confirmed. She revolutionized how we approach mass casualty events, developed techniques that allow medical personnel to make life-or-death decisions in seconds under conditions that would paralyze most practitioners. Sarah was looking increasingly uncomfortable with this recitation of her achievements, and I could see her preparing to deflect attention away from her military service. But Commander Rodriguez wasn't finished, and her next words carried the weight of official recognition that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. Admiral Stone also asked me to inform you that your request for disability rating review has been expedited and resolved, she said, handing Sarah an official envelope. Full permanent disability rating approved, retroactive benefits processed, and housing assistance authorized at the highest level. Sarah accepted the envelope with trembling hands, her carefully maintained composure finally beginning to crack as she absorbed the implications of what Commander Rodriguez was telling her. Years of bureaucratic struggle had just been resolved with a single phone call, and the intervention of people who understood her value in ways the normal system had failed to recognize. Commander Rodriguez, she said quietly, I don't know how to thank you for this. Commander Rodriguez's expression softened slightly, showing something more personal beneath her official authority. Commander Mitchell, Admiral Stone asked me to deliver a message. He said to tell you that the Navy takes care of its own, especially those who sacrificed everything in service to others. He also said to tell you that it's past time the system started treating you with the respect you've earned. She turned to address Dr. Westfield and his staff with the kind of tone that carried implications beyond the immediate situation. Doctor, Commander Mitchell's treatment is to be handled as a priority patient. Any future medical needs she has are to be processed through Naval Medical Command, with full authorization and no cost to the patient. Dr. Westfield nodded immediately, his expression showing genuine enthusiasm for providing care to someone whose service record commanded such obvious respect. Absolutely, Commander Rodriguez will make sure Commander Mitchell receives the best possible care. Commander Rodriguez checked her watch with the efficient movements of someone managing a tight schedule. Lieutenant Vega and I need to return to base, but Commander Mitchell, Admiral Stone asked that you contact his office within the next week. He wants to discuss some opportunities that might interest you. Sarah looked puzzled by this request, but she nodded her acceptance. Yes, ma'am. I'll contact his office. Commander Rodriguez gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but she paused at the door to address the room one final time. Everyone here has had the privilege of meeting someone whose service to this country has been extraordinary by any measure. Commander Mitchell's contributions to military medicine have saved more lives than we can count. And her innovations continue to save lives in hospitals throughout this country every single day. She looked directly at Sarah. The fact that she was sitting in this office trying to figure out how to pay for emergency dental treatment is a failure of the system, not a reflection of her worth. That failure has been corrected, and it won't happen again. With that, Commander Rodriguez and Lieutenant Vega left the consultation room, their footsteps echoing down the hallway as they made their way back to whatever official vehicle had brought them to Sacramento. The room they left behind felt somehow different, charged with the residual energy of official recognition and the transformation of Sarah's situation from financial hardship to immediate resolution. Dr. Westfield was the first to break the silence, turning to Sarah with an expression that combined professional respect with genuine warmth. "Commander Mitchell, I want you to know that it's an honor to provide your dental care. When would you like to schedule your root canal procedure?" Sarah looked around the room, taking in the faces of people whose perception of her had been completely transformed in the span of 30 minutes. Jessica was beaming with the satisfaction of someone who'd played a crucial role in ensuring that a hero received proper recognition. Dr. Harrison was reviewing the authorization paperwork with obvious satisfaction at being able to provide care without financial barriers. "Could we do it today?" Sarah asked quietly. "I mean, if you have time. I've been dealing with this pain for weeks, and now that the authorization is processed..." Dr. Westfield consulted his schedule, then nodded with the enthusiasm of someone eager to demonstrate the level of care that Sarah's service record deserved. "Absolutely. Dr. Harrison, can you clear your afternoon schedule? I think Commander Mitchell has waited long enough for proper treatment." Dr. Harrison was already moving toward the door, clearly eager to prepare for a procedure that would finally address Sarah's immediate medical needs. "I'll get everything ready. Commander Mitchell will have you feeling much better within a couple of hours." As the dental team prepared for Sarah's treatment, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd witnessed in the past hour. My sister had walked into this office as someone struggling with bureaucratic obstacles and financial limitations, someone whose worth was measured by credit scores and payment plans. She was leaving as someone whose service to her country had been officially recognized and honored, whose medical needs would never again be subject to bureaucratic delays or financial barriers. But what struck me most was how little Sarah herself had changed throughout this entire encounter. She'd accepted recognition with the same quiet dignity she'd shown when facing financial rejection. She'd received official honors with the same composure she'd maintained when explaining her inability to afford treatment. The external circumstances had been transformed completely, but Sarah remained fundamentally the same person who'd quietly endured months of bureaucratic frustration without complaint. That afternoon, as Sarah underwent the dental treatment she'd needed for weeks, I sat in the waiting room thinking about all the people who move through our daily lives without recognition for what they've accomplished or sacrificed. How many heroes sit quietly in government offices, medical waiting rooms, and service counters, dealing with the same bureaucratic obstacles as everyone else, while carrying experiences that most of us can't imagine? Jessica approached me while Sarah was in surgery, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that suggested she'd been thinking about similar questions. "I keep wondering how many times this happens," she said, settling into the chair next to mine. "How many people we see every day who have stories like your sister's, but nobody recognizes them." I accepted the coffee gratefully, thinking about her question. Sarah never talks about her military service. If you hadn't noticed those coordinates on her wrist, none of this would have happened. She would have left here without treatment, tried to find somewhere cheaper, maybe ended up in an emergency room when the infection got worse. Jessica nodded slowly. "My brother always said that the real heroes don't look like what people expect heroes to look like. They don't wear uniforms anymore. They don't have medals pinned to their civilian clothes. They just go about their daily lives dealing with the same problems as everyone else." 3 hours later, Sarah emerged from the treatment area with a slightly swollen face but looking more comfortable than she had in weeks. Dr. Westfield accompanied her, clearly satisfied with the results of the procedure and eager to ensure that her recovery would be smooth and complete. "The root canal went perfectly," he told me. "We'll want to see her again in a week to check on the healing, and then we'll schedule the other 2 procedures. Everything will be covered through the Naval Medical Authorization." Sarah thanked him quietly, with the same understated grace she'd shown throughout this entire experience. As we prepared to leave, Jessica approached with a business card and something that looked like a small gift bag. "Commander Mitchell, "This is my personal number," she said, handing Sarah the card. "If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call. And this," she held up the gift bag, "is just something small from all of us here. A thank you for your service." Sarah accepted both gifts with obvious reluctance, clearly uncomfortable with gestures that felt too much like charity or special treatment. But there was something in Jessica's expression that suggested this was important to her, a way of expressing gratitude that went beyond professional courtesy. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, "for everything." As we left Premier Dental Associates that afternoon, I realized that I'd witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the resolution of Sarah's immediate medical needs, but a demonstration of what happened when systems worked the way they were supposed to work. When people in positions of authority used that authority to ensure that heroes received the recognition and care they deserved. The drive home was quiet, with Sarah processing everything that had happened while dealing with the discomfort of dental surgery. But as we reached the outskirts of Sacramento, she turned to me with an expression I hadn't seen in months. "You know what the strangest part of all this was?" she said. "What?" For just a few minutes in that office, I remembered what it felt like to be valued for something other than my ability to pay bills or fill out forms correctly. I'd forgotten that feeling. I thought about her words as we continued driving home, about the difference between being seen as a problem to be managed and being recognized as a person whose contributions mattered. About how many Sarah Mitchells were sitting in waiting rooms and standing in lines, carrying stories of service and sacrifice that nobody bothered to discover. That evening, as Sarah rested comfortably for the first time in weeks, I found myself thinking about Jessica's question. How many heroes do we encounter every day without recognizing them? How many times do we make assumptions about people based on their appearance, their circumstances, or their apparent ability to afford whatever service they're seeking? Sarah's experience at Premier Dental Associates had changed more than just her immediate medical situation. It had reminded everyone present that dignity and respect shouldn't be contingent on financial status or bureaucratic approval, that the person sitting quietly in the corner, dealing with paperwork and payment plans, might be someone whose contributions to our collective well-being have been extraordinary. Most importantly, it had demonstrated that when systems work properly, when people in positions of authority remember that their job is to serve rather than to gatekeep, remarkable things can happen. Heroes can receive the recognition they deserve, medical care can be provided based on need rather than ability to pay, and bureaucratic obstacles can be removed by people who understand that some situations require immediate action rather than extended processing. The next morning, Sarah woke up without the pain that had been her constant companion for months. Her face was still slightly swollen from the dental procedure, but for the first time in weeks she could drink coffee without wincing, could speak without favoring one side of her mouth, could sleep without being awakened by throbbing pain. But more than the physical relief, there was something different in her demeanor. A straightening of her shoulders, a steadiness in her voice, a sense that she'd been reminded of her own worth in ways that went beyond medical treatment or financial assistance. "I think I'm going to call Admiral Stone's office today," she told me over breakfast. Commander Rodriguez said he wanted to discuss some opportunities. I'm curious what that means. I smiled, thinking about how much had changed since yesterday morning, when Sarah had been dreading a dental appointment she couldn't afford, and trying to figure out how to manage pain that was affecting every aspect of her life. "Whatever those opportunities are," I said, "I have a feeling Admiral Stone knows exactly what kind of person he's dealing with." Sarah returned my smile, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. "You know what? I think you're right." 2 days later, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the phone number Commander Rodriguez had given her for Admiral Stone's office. The swelling in her face had gone down considerably, and for the first time in months, she could eat normal food without pain shooting through her jaw. The physical relief was extraordinary, but it was the psychological impact that surprised her most. She'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without immediately calculating how much discomfort she'd have to manage throughout the day. The apartment was sparse but clean, furnished with pieces she'd collected from thrift stores and yard sales over the past 2 years. Nothing matched, but everything served its purpose, and there was something peaceful about the simplicity of it all. She'd learned to find comfort in having just what she needed, and nothing more. in spaces that didn't demand maintenance or worry about appearances. She dialed the number before she could talk herself out of it, her finger tracing the digits with the precision of someone who'd memorized important phone numbers during years when communication failures could mean life or death. The phone rang twice before a crisp voice answered. Admiral Stone's office, Petty Officer Martinez speaking. This is Commander Sarah Mitchell. Admiral Stone asked me to call about some opportunities he wanted to discuss. There was a brief pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. Yes, Commander Mitchell. Admiral Stone has been expecting your call. Please hold while I connect you directly. The hold music was mercifully brief, replaced within seconds by a voice that carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Yet there was warmth in it too, the kind of personal attention that suggested this wasn't just another administrative call. Commander Mitchell, thank you for calling. I hope your dental treatment went smoothly. Yes, sir, much better than expected. I wanted to thank you for intervening on my behalf. The authorization made all the difference. Admiral Stone's voice carried a note of satisfaction mixed with something that sounded like frustration at the system that had made his intervention necessary. Commander, that authorization should never have been required. The fact that a combat veteran with your service record was dealing with bureaucratic delays for emergency medical care represents a failure at multiple levels. Sarah found herself straightening unconsciously, responding to the command presence even through the phone connection. Sir, I understand that the VA approval process can be complex. I wasn't trying to circumvent proper procedures. Commander Mitchell, I've reviewed your file extensively since Dr. Westfield's call. What I found there convinced me that we need to have a face-to-face conversation about your future. Are you available to visit Naval Medical Center San Diego next week? The invitation caught Sarah off guard, and she found herself calculating travel costs and time away from the part-time work she'd been doing to supplement her disability payments. But there was something in Admiral Stone's tone that suggested this wasn't really a request, and that the logistics would be handled appropriately. Yes, sir. I can arrange that. Excellent. I'm having my office arrange travel and accommodations. You'll receive a packet tomorrow with all the details. Commander Mitchell, I want you to understand that this conversation is about opportunities that match your qualifications and experience. We have positions within Naval Medical Services that require someone with your specific background. Sarah felt a familiar combination of hope and apprehension, the same feeling she'd experienced when considering whether to return to active duty after her recovery from combat injuries. The idea of being needed again, of having skills that were valued rather than simply tolerated, was both exciting and terrifying. Sir, may I ask what kind of positions you're referring to? Admiral Stone's voice took on the tone of someone who'd given considerable thought to the match between available opportunities and Sarah's unique qualifications. We're developing new training protocols for combat medical personnel, based partly on innovations you developed during your deployments. We need someone with your field experience to help design and implement these programs. The words hit Sarah with unexpected force. For months, she'd been focused on basic survival, on navigating bureaucratic obstacles and managing chronic pain while trying to maintain some semblance of normal civilian life. The idea that her military experience might still have value, that the techniques she'd developed under fire might help train the next generation of combat medics, opened possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. Additionally, Admiral Stone continued, we're establishing a new Veterans Medical Advocacy Program, designed to prevent the kind of bureaucratic delays you experienced. We need someone who understands both the medical needs of combat veterans and the systemic obstacles they face when transitioning to civilian care. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what Admiral Stone was describing. These weren't token positions or charitable gestures designed to make her feel useful. They were roles that required specific expertise, experience that couldn't be taught in textbooks or acquired through conventional career paths. Sir, I'm honored by your confidence, but I should mention that I've been out of active service for several years. My medical knowledge might not be current with the latest developments. Admiral Stone's response carried the kind of confidence that came from making personnel decisions based on fundamental capabilities rather than surface qualifications. Commander Mitchell, the kind of knowledge you possess doesn't become obsolete. Your understanding of how to make life-or-death medical decisions under impossible conditions, your innovations in field surgery techniques, your insights into what combat veterans need from the medical system, these are exactly the qualifications we're looking for. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering logistics and expectations, But Sarah found herself focused on something Admiral Stone had said early in the call. The idea that her experience had ongoing value, that the skills she'd developed during the most challenging period of her life might be the foundation for a new kind of service. After hanging up, she sat quietly in her apartment, processing everything that had changed since she'd walked into Premier Dental Associates 3 days earlier. The physical pain that had been her constant companion was gone, replaced by a clarity of thought she hadn't experienced in months. The financial stress that had dominated her decision-making had been eliminated through proper application of benefits she'd earned but hadn't been able to access. Most importantly, she'd been reminded that her service record represented achievements rather than just memories, capabilities that remained relevant rather than historical artifacts. That afternoon, she drove back to Sacramento to have her follow-up appointment with Dr. Westfield. The dental office felt different now, not just because her status as a patient had changed, but because her interaction with the staff had evolved from a financial transaction to something that felt more like professional courtesy between people who respected each other's expertise. Jessica greeted her with genuine warmth, asking about her recovery and mentioning that her brother had been excited to hear about their encounter. He said to tell you that knowing you got proper recognition for your service made his whole month. He's always worried that the system doesn't take care of the people who sacrificed the most. Dr. Westfield's examination revealed that Sarah's healing was progressing exactly as expected, and he scheduled the 2 additional procedures for the following month to be completed after her return from San Diego. His manner was professional but carried the undertone of someone who genuinely enjoyed providing care to a patient whose background he respected. "Commander Mitchell, I wanted to mention something that's come up since your visit," he said as he completed his examination. "We've had several staff members ask about ways to better identify and assist veterans who might be struggling with medical access issues. Would you be willing to help us develop some protocols for recognizing and addressing these situations?" The request surprised Sarah, but she found herself considering it seriously. The idea of helping prevent other veterans from experiencing the kind of bureaucratic obstacles she'd faced held genuine appeal, especially if it could be done without creating additional burdens for medical practices trying to serve their communities effectively. "I'd be happy to help with that, Dr. Westfield. What kind of protocols are you thinking about?" Dr. Westfield consulted his notes, clearly having given this considerable thought since their last interaction. "We're thinking about staff training on veteran benefits and medical coverage, better coordination with VA approval processes, and maybe some kind of emergency treatment fund for situations where bureaucratic delays are preventing necessary care." Sarah nodded, recognizing the practical value of such initiatives while also understanding the complexities involved in implementing them effectively. Those are excellent ideas. The key would be creating systems that identify veterans who need assistance without making them feel like charity cases or forcing them to discuss their service record if they're not comfortable doing so. Their conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering practical details of veteran identification and assistance protocols. Sarah found herself energized by the discussion, realizing that her recent experience had given her insights into systemic problems that could potentially be addressed through relatively simple changes in procedures and staff training. A week later, Sarah found herself on a plane to San Diego, traveling at government expense for the first time in years. The flight was smooth, and she spent most of it reading materials Admiral Stone's office had sent her about the positions they wanted to discuss. The training protocol development role would involve working with active-duty medical personnel to create realistic combat medical simulations, incorporating lessons learned from recent deployments in ways that could save lives in future conflicts. The Veterans Medical Advocacy Program was more complex, involving coordination between military medical facilities, VA regional offices, and civilian healthcare providers to ensure that combat veterans receive timely access to needed care regardless of which system they were navigating. It would require someone who understood both the medical needs of veterans and the bureaucratic obstacles that often prevented them from receiving appropriate treatment. Naval Medical Center San Diego was larger than Sarah had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings that served both active-duty personnel and veterans throughout the region. Admiral Stone's office was located in the administrative wing, with a view of the harbor that reminded Sarah of mornings when she'd watched ships deploy to locations she'd soon be following. Admiral Stone himself was impressive without being intimidating, a man in his early 60s who carried his authority with the kind of easy confidence that came from decades of making difficult decisions under pressure. His office was decorated with photographs and commendations that told the story of a career spent in naval medical services, including several images from field hospitals that looked remarkably similar to facilities Sarah remembered from her own deployments. "Commander Mitchell, thank you for making the trip. I hope the flight was comfortable." "Yes, sir. Thank you for arranging everything so efficiently." Admiral Stone gestured toward a conference table where several folders were arranged with military precision. "I wanted to discuss these opportunities in detail, but first, I want to address something that's been bothering me since I learned about your situation last week." He opened one of the folders, revealing what appeared to be Sarah's complete military medical record. "Commander, your disability rating was significantly lower than it should have been, based on the injuries you sustained during your final deployment. The bureaucratic delays you experienced weren't just inefficiency. They were the result of improper initial assessments that took years to correct." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach, the same feeling she'd experienced during months of appeals and reviews that seemed designed to discourage rather than assist veterans seeking appropriate recognition for service-connected disabilities. "Sir, I understood that the rating process was complex and that appeals took time." Admiral Stone's expression showed the kind of controlled anger that superior officers reserve for situations where their personnel had been failed by systems that were supposed to support them. "Commander Mitchell, your initial disability rating was based on incomplete medical records and inadequate assessment of your combat injuries. The correct rating should have been established years ago, with retroactive benefits that would have prevented the financial hardships you've been experiencing." He slid a document across the table, an official form that showed Sarah's disability rating had been increased to 100%, with retroactive benefits calculated from the date of her initial application rather than the recent review. The numbers were substantial enough to represent genuine financial security rather than mere subsistence. "This correction has been processed at the highest priority level with retroactive payments that will be deposited within the next week. Additionally, your medical benefits have been upgraded to include full coverage for all healthcare needs, including dental care, mental health services, and any ongoing treatment related to your service-connected conditions." Sarah stared at the document, processing numbers that represented more money than she'd seen in years, benefits that would eliminate the constant financial stress that had dominated her civilian life since leaving active duty. But beyond the practical implications, there was something more significant in Admiral Stone's words, a recognition that her struggles hadn't been personal failings but systemic problems that could and should have been addressed much earlier. "Sir, I don't know what to say." Admiral Stone's expression softened slightly, showing something more personal beneath his official authority. "Commander Mitchell, you don't need to say anything. This is what should have happened years ago. What we need to focus on now is making sure your experience and expertise are put to use in ways that will help other veterans avoid similar struggles." He opened the second folder, revealing detailed job descriptions for the positions he'd mentioned during their phone conversation. The training protocol development role would be based at Naval Medical Center San Diego, with regular travel to other installations to implement new programs and assess their effectiveness. The Veterans Medical Advocacy position would involve coordination with VA regional offices throughout the western United States, working to streamline approval processes and eliminate bureaucratic obstacles that delayed necessary care. Both positions carry significant responsibility and require someone with your specific combination of medical expertise and understanding of veteran healthcare challenges, Admiral Stone continued. The training role would involve working directly with combat medics and field surgeons, helping them develop skills that could save lives in situations similar to those you faced during your deployments. Sarah studied the job descriptions, recognizing that these weren't token positions created to make her feel useful, but roles that required genuine expertise and would have measurable impact on military medical readiness and veteran care. The training position particularly appealed to her, offering the opportunity to pass on hard-won knowledge to medical personnel who might face similar challenges in future deployments. The advocacy role would be more challenging in some ways, Admiral Stone said, because it would require working within existing bureaucratic systems to create change rather than working around them. But your recent experience with VA approval delays gives you insights that most people in leadership positions lack. Sarah found herself considering both opportunities seriously, weighing the appeal of direct medical training against the broader systemic impact of advocacy work. Both roles offered the chance to use her experience in ways that could benefit other veterans, but they would require different skills and involve different types of challenges. "Sir, may I ask about the timeline for making this decision?" Admiral Stone consulted his calendar, apparently having anticipated this question. "We'd like to have someone in place for the training position within the next month, since we have several programs scheduled to begin implementation in the fall. The advocacy role has a more flexible timeline, but ideally we'd start that program before the end of the year." Sarah realized she was being offered the opportunity to take both positions, either simultaneously or in sequence, depending on how the responsibilities could be structured. The idea of diving back into meaningful work, of being needed for her expertise rather than tolerated as a recipient of benefits, was both exciting and somewhat overwhelming. "Admiral Stone, I'm very interested in both opportunities. Would it be possible to start with the training role and then transition into advocacy work once those protocols are established?" Admiral Stone nodded approvingly, apparently pleased with her approach to the decision. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd suggest, Commander Mitchell. The training protocols will take several months to develop and implement effectively. Once they're established, you'd be in an excellent position to transition into advocacy work, using your experience with the training programs to inform policy recommendations." They spent the next hour discussing practical details of the positions, including salary structures that were substantially higher than Sarah's disability payments, relocation assistance to the San Diego area, and support for continuing education that would keep her current with developments in military medical practice. Everything about the conversation reinforced Admiral Stone's statement that these were opportunities based on her qualifications rather than charitable gestures designed to help a struggling veteran. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Stone stood and extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Commander Mitchell, I want you to know that bringing you back into Naval Medical Services isn't just good for you. It's good for the Navy. And it's good for the veterans who will benefit from your expertise in advocacy." Sarah accepted the handshake, feeling something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just the satisfaction of being needed, but the recognition that her struggles with bureaucratic obstacles and financial hardship had given her insights that could help prevent other veterans from facing similar challenges. That evening, as Sarah walked along the harbor near her hotel, she found herself thinking about everything that had changed since her visit to Premier Dental Associates. A week ago, she'd been someone struggling with basic medical care, trying to navigate bureaucratic obstacles while managing chronic pain and financial stress. Now she was someone whose experience was valued, whose expertise was needed, whose future included opportunities that matched her qualifications and background. But what struck her most was the realization that her worth hadn't actually changed. She'd been the same person with the same experience and capabilities when she'd walked into that dental office unable to afford treatment. The difference was that she'd encountered people who recognized her value and had the authority to address the systemic obstacles that had been preventing her from accessing appropriate care and opportunities. The next morning, she called Admiral Stone's office to formally accept both positions, with the understanding that she'd start with the training protocol development and transition into advocacy work as circumstances allowed. The conversation was brief and professional, but there was satisfaction in Admiral Stone's voice that suggested he'd been confident in her decision. Her flight back to Sacramento gave her time to process the magnitude of the changes ahead. She'd need to relocate to San Diego, a move that would be supported by the Navy, but would still require leaving the small, quiet life she'd built for herself over the past few years. She'd be returning to a world of military protocols and official responsibilities, after years of civilian anonymity and independence. But there was something appealing about the prospect of being needed again, of having skills that were valued and experience that could make a difference in other people's lives. The training role would allow her to help prepare medical personnel for challenges she understood better than almost anyone else alive. The advocacy work would give her the opportunity to address systemic problems that had affected her personally and continued to affect thousands of other veterans. When she arrived back in Sacramento, she found a message from Jessica at Premier Dental Associates, asking if she'd be available to meet with their staff about veteran identification and assistance protocols. The timing was perfect, giving her an opportunity to begin advocacy work immediately while preparing for her transition to the new positions in San Diego. The meeting at Premier Dental Associates drew a larger crowd than Sarah had expected. Not just the dental staff, but representatives from other medical practices in the area who'd heard about their Veteran Assistance Initiative and wanted to learn about implementation strategies. Dr. Westfield had apparently been discussing their ideas with colleagues, and word had spread that someone with Sarah's background was willing to help develop practical protocols for identifying and assisting veterans who might be struggling with medical access issues. Sarah found herself presenting to a group of about 20 healthcare professionals, discussing practical strategies for recognizing veterans who might need assistance without creating embarrassing situations or forcing people to disclose their military service. The key, she explained, was creating systems that offered help without requiring veterans to ask for it directly, recognizing that many combat veterans had learned to avoid drawing attention to their needs or circumstances. The most important thing to understand, Sarah told the group, is that many veterans, especially those who've seen combat, have learned to present themselves as self-sufficient even when they're struggling with significant challenges. They're not likely to volunteer information about financial hardship or bureaucratic obstacles unless directly asked, and even then, they may minimize their problems. She described practical indicators that staff members could watch for, ways to offer assistance that felt like professional courtesy rather than charity, and strategies for coordinating with VA benefits systems to expedite approvals when possible. The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours, with healthcare professionals asking detailed questions about implementation and sharing their own experiences with veteran patients. Dr. Westfield concluded the meeting by announcing that Premier Dental Associates would be establishing a formal veteran assistance program, with protocols based on Sarah's recommendations and funding from the practice's community service budget. Several other practices indicated their intention to implement similar programs, creating a network of veteran-friendly healthcare providers throughout the Sacramento area. As Sarah prepared to leave Sacramento for her new position in San Diego, she realized that her experience at Premier Dental Associates had created ripple effects that extended far beyond her personal situation. The recognition she'd received had led to opportunities that would allow her to help other veterans, while the advocacy protocols she'd helped develop were being implemented by healthcare providers who would serve thousands of patients. 2 weeks later, Sarah reported for duty at Naval Medical Center San Diego, wearing a uniform that felt both familiar and strange after years of civilian clothing. The building that housed the Training Protocol Development Office was modern and efficient, with conference rooms equipped for video communication with military installations worldwide. Her first assignment involved reviewing after-action reports from recent medical deployments, identifying common challenges that could be addressed through improved training protocols. The work was absorbing in ways she hadn't expected, requiring her to analyze situations similar to those she'd faced during her own deployments, while developing solutions that could be implemented systematically rather than improvised under fire. Working alongside her were other medical professionals who'd served in combat environments, people who understood the unique challenges of providing medical care under conditions that civilian training couldn't adequately simulate. The collaborative atmosphere was energizing, combining individual expertise into programs that could genuinely improve medical outcomes in future conflicts. Within her first month, Sarah had contributed to the development of 3 new training modules, each designed to prepare medical personnel for specific challenges she'd encountered during her deployments. The modules used realistic simulations combined with the decision-making scenarios that reflected the complexity of actual combat medical situations. But it was her work on the Veterans Advocacy Program that proved most personally satisfying. Working with VA regional offices and civilian healthcare providers, she helped streamline approval processes that had created the delays she'd experienced personally. The program included training for VA staff on expedited review procedures, coordination protocols with civilian providers, and systematic follow-up to ensure that veterans received timely access to needed care. 6 months after her return to naval service, Sarah received a call from Jessica at Premier Dental Associates. The veteran assistance protocols they'd implemented had been successfully used to help dozens of veterans access needed dental care, with several cases involving emergency procedures that had been expedited through improved coordination with VA benefits systems. Commander Mitchell, I wanted you to know that your recommendations have made a real difference here, Jessica said. We've helped veterans who were in situations similar to yours, and having the protocols in place made all the difference in getting them the care they needed. Sarah felt a deep satisfaction at this news, recognizing that her difficult experience with bureaucratic obstacles had ultimately led to systems that would prevent other veterans from facing similar challenges. The advocacy work was proving as rewarding as the training protocol development, creating measurable improvements in veteran healthcare access throughout the region. As her first year in the new positions concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a dental office, where she couldn't afford treatment, to a position where her expertise was valued, and her advocacy work was creating systematic improvements in veteran care. The physical pain that had dominated her civilian life was completely gone, treated effectively through proper medical care that was no longer subject to bureaucratic delays. The financial stress that had shaped her daily decisions had been eliminated through appropriate disability benefits and meaningful employment that matched her qualifications. Most importantly, she'd rediscovered a sense of purpose that came from using her experience to help others, rather than simply surviving from day to day. But the transformation that meant the most to her was subtler than these practical improvements. She'd learned that her worth as a person hadn't been determined by her ability to pay for dental treatment or navigate bureaucratic obstacles successfully. Her value had always been inherent in her experience, her capabilities, and her commitment to service, even when systems failed to recognize or support those qualities. The recognition she'd received at Premier Dental Associates hadn't created her worth, it had simply revealed worth that had always existed, but had been obscured by financial hardship and bureaucratic obstacles. The opportunities she'd been offered weren't charity, but appropriate utilization of expertise that had been developed through sacrifice and service that most people would never be asked to make. As Sarah looked ahead to continued work in training protocol development and veterans advocacy, she understood that her story represented more than just personal success. It demonstrated what was possible when systems worked properly, when people in positions of authority used that authority to ensure that those who'd served their country received appropriate recognition and support. Most importantly, it served as a reminder that heroes don't always look like what people expect heroes to look like. They sit quietly in medical waiting rooms, stand patiently in government offices, and deal with the same bureaucratic obstacles as everyone else, carrying experiences and capabilities that most people never get to see or appreciate. The lesson wasn't that every veteran deserved special treatment, but that every person deserved to be seen as more than their immediate circumstances might suggest. That dignity and respect shouldn't be contingent on ability to pay or bureaucratic approval, and that sometimes the person who looks like they need help the most might be exactly the person who has the most to offer. Sarah's experience had shown her that recognition, when it came, could transform not just individual circumstances but entire systems, creating improvements that benefited many people beyond the original recipient of that recognition. Her advocacy work was helping hundreds of veterans access needed care, while her training protocols were preparing military medical personnel to save lives in future conflicts. But perhaps most importantly, her story had reminded everyone who encountered it that assumptions about people based on their apparent circumstances were often wrong, and that taking the time to discover someone's actual background and capabilities could reveal extraordinary stories of service, sacrifice, and expertise that deserved recognition and respect. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.